Welcome everybody to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO of GoLocal. This is Nick Mattiello, Speaker of the House. Mr. Speaker, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Josh.
Absolutely. We're right in the heat of the season of political chaos, right out of the primaries. You've been 4 years as Speaker of the House. You've had some big wins, repealing the auto tax, which we all appreciate, every single one of us, all these people outside. You've had some other wins, but you're also in the meat of some heavy heat, both from the primaries and in the general. Let's talk about the primaries. What was your take from, what were those voters trying to say to people coming out of the primaries?
I don't know that they were saying anything specific. What I would say is candidates matter, and we had some candidates that we supported not win, and a lot of them win. And overall, we had a pretty good night. It's not reported that way, but I thought we had a real good night. If you compare it to 4 years ago, we lost the majority leader and 3 other incumbents. That didn't happen this time. We held on to all of our solid folks, and we, on average, had a great night.
Were there any big surprises? Was there anything you took away? I think one thing we saw was maybe progressive type candidates at the statewide level were not as strong as progressive candidates in the local level, especially in Providence, where on the city council and some of the state representatives, whoever was more progressive outperformed the other candidate.
I would say the state, as in total, is not very progressive, but you have pockets in different communities. But my observation is that that's still too general, in that candidates matter. And I would say, on average, who you'd expect to win won, and there weren't a lot of big surprises.
Were you surprised that the governor beat the combination of Matt Brown and Spencer Dickinson, roughly 57-43? Was that about where you anticipated, or did she perform a little bit better than you might have thought?
I thought it was going to be a little closer, but I always anticipated she would win that race. I think her campaign did a really good job, and that's probably a good example of how to run a campaign. They really got their vote out, and I think that's how they opened up their margins a little bit. But she and her campaign did a great job. You got to take your hat off to them. But I always expected that she would win the race, just maybe a little tighter.
Did you vote on primary day?
Absolutely.
Did you vote for Gina Raimondo?
Absolutely.
I think that was a question from one of our readers. Let's go over the Republican side real quick.
I've said that publicly numerous times.
Go over the Republican side for a second. Alan Fung got almost the exact same number of votes, just 1,000 more than he did in 2014. Patricia Morgan performed almost exactly the way Ken Block did 4 years. Were you surprised that he didn't have a little bit larger margin against a less funded Patricia Morgan?
No, and I'm going to put out a big disclaimer. I am not a political commentator or analyst, but
you are today.
I guess. I'm promoted. Or demoted, however you look at it.
Yeah, that's right.
But
however you want to consider it.
On average, I think it was kind of a quiet primary, so I'm not surprised that things did not change very much.
We head over to the general. It is 7 weeks from today. It's a quick sprint. You've got a tough race for re-election. You won by 85 votes, really delivered on paper ballots over machines. It's 2 years later, same opponent. He's out there working, you're out there working. What's going to decide your election in the 15th House District?
Well, I think you have to first give the consideration to my constituents. They're going to decide what's going to decide it. But what I will say is this: yes, I do have a competitive race. I have an opponent that's competitive. He's working very hard. I'm working very hard. I think the difference between 2 years ago and now is the mood of the voter. 2 years ago, we sensed a lot more frustration and anger with the entire electoral system. this year, we're sensing people are much more satisfied and content with the direction the state is going in. Our unemployment rate's down. We have more people working. I worked real hard on aligning the electorate with the elected officials, and that was one of the big reasons for the car tax. It was hard to do, but if folks were dissatisfied with their government, we had to be more responsive to them, their needs, their wants. And the car tax, I'm finding, is a big factor, and I'm hearing a lot of praise regarding that at a lot of doors. But in essence, people are more content with the direction that the state is going. So I feel very comfortable. And the one thing I want to say, every analysis, folks say you won by 85 or 87, whatever the number was.
Right.
That was 2 years ago. You don't start where you left off 2 years ago. So I'm hearing from a lot of folks that there's a lot of people that didn't vote for me that now are. And you know, I know folks didn't vote for me. They actually have my sign up. It's just different. And I'm sure some people that voted for me may not this time. It's just a very different election.
Right, it's all anew. Buddy
Yes.
Cianci used to make fun of me because I won by 16 votes when I was on the city council battling with him. I also corrected him that he didn't have the biggest landslides as mayor of Providence at that point in time. He used to win by under about 200 votes accordingly. Let's talk about some of the issues that came up this last legislative year and how are they breaking? Obviously, the Pawtucket Red Sox, yesterday was the big rally in Worcester. Pedro Martinez and Louis Tiant and Larry Lucchino adorning the stage up there. Do you think you did the right thing on the PAW tax? Was that the best solution, or is that really the only solution you could come up with?
Well, let me say I think we absolutely did the right thing because we listened to the public as closely as we could. You had a poll.
GoLocal, absolutely. John
GoLocal.
Della Volpe at Harvard, one of the best pollsters in the country.
All right, and so roughly 60% or whatever the number was opposed to it. That was my experience. That was my colleagues' experience. And you know, I've said this before. We've gave all of this information to other publications, and everybody is remorseful now that the Paw Sox left. In the news media, but my constituents are not. My constituents are on average saying thank you for listening to us, thank you for doing the right thing. Sometimes the deal you don't get is the better deal, and there were actually some letters to the editor on that. I think, you know, I wish Worcester well,
yeah.
I wish the Paw Sox well, but at the end of the day, that's a lot of money to pay back, and we'll know in 5 or 10 years if it was a good investment or not. I'm glad that Rhode Island does not have to bear that burden.
Other big issues that are going to be decided, you know, had developments last year, they go on to the future. The expansion of free college, now it goes to the community college level. The governor is running on expanding that to Rhode Island College and the University of Rhode Island. Our news editor, Kate Nagel, broke a story about CCRI's performance may not be at the level that it needs to be. Many of the students who are taking advantage of the free tuition are nowhere near close to graduating even in 3 years. What are your thoughts about how we progress on this idea of free state college education for masses of students?
I think it's worthy of a discussion, but I think you have to be very cautious. First of all, I always try to be competitive with other states. Mm-hmm. So if you're doing it and they're not, you're bearing a burden that they're not bearing, and they're going to be more competitive than you somewhere else. So you have to be mindful of that. You have to be mindful of the fact that once you commit to it, the state has to be able and willing to fully fund our universities, otherwise they're going to become second rate, or you're going to accept all out-of-state students, which is not good for Rhode Islanders. So there's a lot of policy considerations to consider, and we'll in fact do that. It's a worthy debate, and we'll see. It seems like that's a direction that people are pushing in. I hear from a lot of constituents that are very opposed to the idea, and some that are in favor of it. So we'll absolutely consider it, but you have to keep in mind that as we consider things and promise folks things, it has to fit within the confines of the budget. And right now, we have a structural deficit. We're starting the year with the $200 million deficit and something.
We're good at that. We almost always start the year with a $200 million deficit.
We have a structural deficit. Our expenses, and usually for the folks that we want to take care of, a lot of social services, taking care of our elderly, developmentally disabled, those expenses rise more than revenues on average, and so we always have a structural deficit.
A large group of legislators have come out really demanding, pushing for you to help them push forward an extension of the statute of limitations on sexual abuse committed within the by priests and others within the church. A number of other states are pushing forward in that. There's a big article in Governing Magazine saying that the Delaware statute's kind of the model statute. We just got a grand jury report out of Pennsylvania. 300 priests tied to sexual abuse, over 1,000 victims. The details of the abuse is as horrifying as anything you could possibly read. Do we need to look at that and extend that statute of limitations and satisfy those demands of both victims and victims' families, as well as those legislators?
Well, let me start by saying that I strongly believe that there was a significant amount of abuse. It's evidenced in Rhode Island. We've had lots of settlements, so the evidence is there that we've had a problem. I am informed, and I believe that, you know, just to put out the full story, that today the church operates very differently than it did in the past, and that they monitor and review their own.
Yeah, but you had it certainly at St. George's. Almost every day there's a prep school that comes forward announcing that they've found cases of it. Should there be some opportunity for those victims to be able to seek some level of justice?
Absolutely, and I think the conversation regarding extending the statute of limitations is certainly a fair one, and one that we probably should have. And you know, generally I don't make public statements when the Journal tries to count votes in a newspaper article. And the reason for that is very simple. These issues are complicated. I had 2 lawyers working on this issue for an entire week. It's complicated. You have to figure out who it's going to apply to and what all the nuances are. So yes, I think we should extend the statute of limitations. You have to look at the retroactive aspect of it. Yeah. You have to look at who it's going to apply to and how it's going to apply. So yes, absolutely. I could have answered the Journal poll in the affirmative, but what are you answering to? Because there's so many different versions. I do expect that that's something that we will look at next year, that we should look at next year. I know a lot of folks want it. And we just have to have a dialogue and a discussion and an analysis and make sure it works for society at large. And there's a lot of considerations. There's one thing that I think people know about me. I'm not very knee-jerk. Our legislative process was designed to work slowly, that things we do have significant consequences in society. So before you change things, you have to fully vet and consider them. There wasn't as much push last year as there is right now.
Absolutely.
So,
right. And I think the grand jury report out of Pennsylvania really refocused it as to the depth and the level of what the impact is.
Absolutely. So yes, I'm planning that that's going to be an issue that we're going to look at, and we're going to look at it very fairly, and we're going to take into account all of society's needs, and we'll come up with something that works.
Let's jump over to another issue. It was kind of a football between the House and the Senate last year, line item veto. I think lots of people said, well, we want line item veto. They couldn't necessarily define which line item veto, because they'd say 45 out of 50 states, and there really are 45 different structures to it. Are you open and or committed to passing some form of line item veto coming up in the next legislative session? And if so, is there a state that you think has the best model?
Well, what I learned looking at this issue, and even if you look at how you asked that question, some form, I guess you could always do some form of something. But we don't do things just, you don't change your Constitution just for the sake of doing it to appease a request. The Constitution is sacred. Our forefathers got it pretty good. We get things done. Now, not everybody always...
Here's the bad news. I have a big Red Bull for this interview today.
All right, there you go. Go easy on me, please. you know, our government works where we get things done. We pass our budgets. There's generally a good relationship between the House, the Senate, and the governor. It works. When you start changing that before you do it, once again, especially, I said, our legislative process should be slow. You should be ultra careful before you change your Constitution. And for everybody that's asked me, are we going to do it? I say, okay, why do you want it and what do you believe it is? And generally speaking, people don't have the answer to it. That's not the basis upon which to change our Constitution. Our current governor said there's nothing in the budget that she would have vetoed in all the time she was in office. Why change the Constitution? So I'm always willing to look at it. Professor LeDuc, a retired professor from URI, one of our leading experts on the panel, vehemently against it from what I read. I never even met him, I didn't go to the committees. I got reports on the commission's work, opposed to it. Learned, intelligent people are not as in favor of it.
I will say this, I worked for John Chafee the day that he was the single deciding vote in the United States Senate to defeat the line item veto. Ronald Reagan called him. I got kicked out of the office so he could take the call from the president. And his view was, and actually it ties right now to the national level, okay, that's fine if it's Ronald Reagan as president or Bill Clinton, but what if you have a Donald Trump as president? There obviously was no Donald Trump,
yes.
But you have somebody who's extreme, who says, I'm going to eliminate the budget for the Department of Energy or the Department of Education,
right.
And that there's a working number in the legislature that could be it. It is a complicated issue. You're saying, I'm going to wait and see. Yes. We'll have a further discussion.
And some of my colleagues don't want it. The colleagues from Burville, let's say.
Yeah.
You know, they're concerned about some spending that goes to the more rural communities that certain governors might just X out at the end of the process, and we may not have the override. Don't forget, to do an override,
yeah.
You have to have the House and the Senate. So that promotes deal makings between one of the chambers and the executive branch. You're giving one person an awful lot of ability, and they may be very, very liberal or very, very conservative,
Absolutely.
but you're giving that one person a lot of ability to X spending items out of a budget, perhaps on ideological basis, that was balanced when it went through the House and the Senate.
Let's tie Rhode Island and Washington together. Obviously, there's a huge United States Supreme Court battle over the president's nominee. We have no idea how that's going to flesh out. But one of the issues here for a majority of Rhode Islanders is that they want to make sure that the existing sort of court's decision, the federal law, precedent-setting Roe v. Wade is kept in place. Are you committed that you will help shepherd through some legislation that will preserve the existing structure of Roe v. Wade in Rhode Island?
So just let me be thorough on this. I am personally pro-life, but I generally have kept a détente in place between pro-life and pro-choice folks. Every civilized nation in the world allows choice, and,
right.
And I recognize that the United States is going to, and so should Rhode Island. There is no case anywhere in the country that is challenging Roe v. Wade. So I've often said it's not an issue that's moot, and we'll always look at all issues, and I'm willing to consider all issues, but right now I don't believe it's as pressing as some folks do.
If it became pressing, would you be open as Speaker to preserve the existing structure?
What I can tell you is if it became pressing, a lot of folks in the chamber that right now don't necessarily want to address it would think it's appropriate to address.
Correct.
We have a lot of folks in society, and when you have, and there's a very large pro-choice population
majority
out there, probably the majority, and you just can't neglect that. So, I mean, we're all mindful of what society is going to expect and need.
Governor Raimondo said something interesting on Election Day. If I don't win re-election, Rhode Islanders will lose jobs. Can you make the same argument? We are at record employment, not even close. All-time high. We're at virtually record unemployment, and for anybody who's in business, we're at zero unemployment. You know, you're just stealing from Peter and Paul. There's nobody who wants a job that's educated or trained that isn't able to. Obviously, we need to do more on job training, but we're functionally at full employment. Is this a result of some of your policies that you've been able to help achieve as Speaker?
Yes, absolutely. I would like to say, and I generally try to be...
Do you want to just coin it right here and now that this is the Mattiello economy? Is that right?
No, absolutely not. That wouldn't be fair. I think that myself and my colleagues in the House certainly have a lot of influence over the economy. The Senate President and his colleagues certainly have a lot of influence over the economy. The governor has been working very hard, and she's very dynamic. She's had a lot of influence over the economy, and the national economy has a lot of influence over the economy. So I would say we're all rowing in the right direction, but what I will take credit for, we lowered the corporate tax, we eliminated sales tax on energy costs. A lot of these cost-cutting measures for business are things that I shepherded and I promoted. The estate tax. You want successful people to stay here. So in my very first year, we lowered the corporate tax rate from 9 to 7, the highest in New England to the lowest in the Northeast. And we raised the estate tax exemption from $621,000 to $1.5 million. That should go higher. You want successful people to stay in the state of Rhode Island.
Listen, half the Paw Sox owners used to be Rhode Islanders. They now live in Florida because of issues like the estate tax.
Now, let me say this, Josh, since you asked. I believe I've been one of the most pro-business speakers in a very long time. I've been one of the biggest tax-cutting speakers in a very long time. And you know, the results are there. The things we've cut are there. That's not going to be duplicated following my retirement from the position. The state is going to be less business friendly when I retire one way or another, because I've just pushed it and promoted it more than anyone in our recent history has done. The results are there. We still have work to do, and that's one of the reasons that I'm knocking on doors and talking to my constituents, because I have 2 children. I'm committed to this state. I'm going nowhere. I want all Rhode Island. I have neighbors that I care about. I want all Rhode Islanders to succeed, and I want all Rhode Islanders to have opportunity, and I want all Rhode Islanders whose kids graduate from college to be able to stay here. And we've neglected our economy for far too long, and that's one of the reasons that I give it so much attention. Interestingly enough, as we lower taxes and we're making ourselves more business friendly, our revenues are going up, and we can do other things. So high tide lifts all boats, and we're going in the right direction.
One corporate giveaway, we've discussed it before. Governor Chafee flagged it. Governor Raimondo put in a budget article as well to eliminate the requirements of cities and towns as well as the state to do legal notices. An out-of-state company owned by another out-of-state company, owned by another out-of-state company, owned by a Japanese venture capital firm, gets about $750,000 a year for legal notices. Cities and towns have been opposed to it for years and years. Its circulation has dropped below many of its peer media, including, you know, TV stations and ourselves. Is it time to do away with that ridiculous provision?
Well, it's always time to do the analysis on it, and obviously that's controversial. And obviously, you want folks who are used to getting notices from a certain publication.
But shouldn't they be online? I mean, it is 2018. The state could post them up. You know, the state could receive a small fee or no fee. I mean, it's an antiquated requirement from, I believe, the 40s or the 50s.
It's a requirement from a time when...
If we see anybody walk down the street with a newspaper, leave it in. If we don't, it's out.
We consider all things at all times.
Let's jump over to your priorities coming up in this session. Let's say you win re-election by a sweeping 85 votes again, maybe even go up to 86 or 87. You come back, you're re-elected as Speaker of the House. What's your #1 priority that you think is most important to improving the lives of Rhode Islanders?
Well, first, I sense and I hope that we're increasing the margin for
more than the 85, 6,
oh,
7.
Absolutely.
Up to 90, 95.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My priority each and every year until it's totally phased out is going to be the car tax phase out. There's always pressure on resources, and I'm committed to getting that done. I want that to be something that I can look back on and say, we did that for Rhode Islanders. So we're going to make sure we get that done. We have to start looking at regulations. I'm hearing that folks are frustrated with our regulatory process. Our permitting process is a little too slow. And I'm not being critical of anyone. We just have to find ways to make it a little more efficient. And we've moved in that direction, but I think we could do a little more. We have to make sure our expenses are competitive with other states, and we've done a lot of good work in this regard, but we have to do more. And we're just going to keep promoting the economy. I started out 4.5 years ago saying jobs in the economy. When you concentrate on it and you make it a priority, good things happen. Good things have happened, and we're going to continue concentrating on jobs and the economy.
Yesterday we had dueling pieces of content. One was about the state of Providence schools. You have proficiency rates in some grades on some subjects of 5% for math and science of certain age groups. Correspondingly, Neil Steinberg from Rhode Island Foundation was on and said, listen, the difference, at the end of the day, if you want to break it down, the difference between Rhode Island and Massachusetts is Massachusetts has better schools. They've had them for 30 years. They've made a consistent commitment. It started with Mike Dukakis and Bill Weld, and it's carried itself through, regardless of who is the governor or the speaker, Democrats or Republicans. Do we need to refocus our energy and our outcomes, demanding higher level of outcomes, for us to be, in the long term, a more competitive and more successful state?
Yes, the answer to that is absolutely yes. How you get there, I'm not quite sure. Our curriculum has not always been perfect. You know, there's one thing I'm pretty convinced of. Our teachers are very good. Our teachers do a great job. I meet and talk to so many of them. They're really committed to our students. They care. They're doing a great job. It's a societal, demographic problem in some situations, and we have to get our curriculum so it lines up with the testing and it brings children to where they need to be. I've been asking what the answer is to this issue in question for years, and nobody has a magic bullet. We have to keep working. The Rhode Island Department of Education certainly has to do better, and we have to improve our education system. That is the key to our success.
We looked at five or 6 years of SAT data in Providence, and it was 100 points in both math, on average, 100 points both on math and on reading, below the national average. That's gone on year after year, regardless of who's mayor or superintendent of schools in Providence. You know, think if Providence had good schools, what the city would look like and feel like, and what the economic engine it would be. Isn't it an economic development issue to really ramp up these schools? You know, you go to most communities in Massachusetts, their test scores, I don't care if they're urban or suburban, they're pretty good.
Yes. Yes, and we have some gems in the rough. I mean, we have some schools that are producing real good results, and great things are going on. I visited some schools where you have some minority students that are really gonna take on the world and do great work, and you're getting good results. And then you have schools that are underperforming. So we've got to see what the thread is, how we get all schools at that level. And like I said, it's definitely not the teacher, in my opinion. They're doing a great job. They care. We have to have families involved, and our students have to want to learn. Everybody has the same opportunity. Everybody has the same ability. Some engage, some do not. In Cranston, some of my schools, some people, you know, some students don't do as well as they should because they're just not engaged. So I think we have to figure out how to engage students and have them take advantage of the opportunities that are provided. But there are some systemic problems. RIDE really has to step up and figure out how to align our students with the education that they're being provided.
Saturday night we drove over to have dinner with friends who live over in the 15th district, and we drove by Cranston West. Cranston West looks from the outside like any prep school in New England. The campus is spectacular, beautiful green fields, the whole 9 yards. Governor Raimondo's running an ad that says the city of Cranston is a city in distress. It's in chaos, whether it's showing Providence or Cranston, we'll leave that aside. But is Cranston in distress? Is Cranston a city? Is this hyperbole of the election cycle?
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, unfortunately, folks just make statement in the election cycle. Even though I support Governor Raimondo, that is not true.
There's a little over-exuberance by the campaign staff and the consultants.
When you look at the factors of what goes into being a distressed community, it's basically the income.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that perhaps the state has an interest in increasing the income of the residents of the entire state. Cranston's a wonderful place to live. I love it. I will never move from Cranston. It's just a wonderful place. Cranston West, great school. A shout out to our principal there, Tom Barbieri. He's dynamic, he's wonderful, the teachers love him, the kids love him, doing a great job. You can't get a better education anywhere in the state. If you find the recipe and the formula that works, things work out really well. We have a lot of great things going on in Cranston, and on average, it's an excellent community and doing very well.
Speaker of the House, Nick Mattiello, I want to thank you for joining us. Half an hour, fast and furious. I'm sorry for drinking so much Red Bull prior to you coming on, but we really appreciate you taking the time. It looks like it's clearing. It looks like it's walking day out in the 15th District. Best of luck to you. Stay right here.
Thank you,
I want to
Josh.
thank everybody for tuning in to Go Local Live. Kate Nagel's going to be back at 4 o'clock. She's got a jam-packed hour. We are hearing that they're at the Teamster headquarters, that they're all tuning in for a special guest that's coming in. I want to thank everybody. We'll see you at 4 with Kate. Josh Fenton, thanks so much.